Alrighty, so welcome. I'm happy that you're here this morning, and I hope that you're feeling creative. And if you're not, don't panic because we have some tools to work on that, and that's kind of where we will start today. So, in thinking about this project and in thinking about what Passover might look like this year, I think it's very easy to it's a very easy jump in logic to say that it's probably not going to look like it has in the past because nothing has. Everything has been different this past year. And what I've tried to learn in times like this is that sometimes I have to train my thinking rather than dwelling on the negative. Look for the blessings, and sometimes they're really small blessings, but if you focus on those, they seem to get a little bigger. And also, so it kind of trains my mind to one of gratitude, and that's kind of the place that I have tried to stay in as best I can, because there's a lot happening. I mean, I think we've all been affected. The world has been affected, and then there's the collective grief of how things have changed, and just the loss. I mean, we've all lost a lot too in this past year, whether we've lost people, actual people, or just our routines and our sense of normalcy. All of that has changed. And so, I think this has been a good chance for me personally to kind of go inward a little bit and to take my downtime to think about these things and think about and plan for going forward, but also take some time to be grateful for the things that I've been able to take away from this. And it will be different for everybody. So I thought that it might be nice to create a work of art that focuses on these things as we kind of prepare for a more spiritual time or a season of celebration that's going to look a little different from what it has in the past. So with that in mind, I'm going to switch to my camera, my other camera, so that you can actually see what it is that I'm doing here. So I have here some materials that I've gathered, and and we're just going to go through those to make sure that everybody has the same thing. So we have our paper, and you should have 4 pieces of paper, the watercolor paper. I have my watercolor paints. If you have any other watercolor paints, I know this is what you got in your kit. If you have anything else that you want to use, feel free. This is we're going to start off with kind of some exercises in creativity, just to kind of get our thought processes going and try to keep it spontaneous. I've found that for me, especially during this time, I have kind of, as an artist, I'm always creating anyway, but I've reintroduced myself to the creative process and let it be more spontaneous and just kind of see what's happening in the moment, being more present and just thinking about, where my thoughts are and just staying kind of in this moment and seeing what the artwork has to tell me, what the supplies have to tell me, what's happening, and just kind of going with it. It's an exercise in creativity, but it's also an exercise in flexibility and adapting and learning not to fight the process, but just kind of flow with it. And so that's kind of where we're going to focus today. So this is the example that you got, and this is not a finished piece. It was one that I was kind of working on, and you can see here that we have the papers. So you should have some scrap papers that you're welcome to use. Now, keep in mind, you don't have to use any of these things, but you're welcome to use these. Some words that I had cut out of a magazine, pictures from a magazine, watercolor paints, part of a painting that I had done, and I really like the symbolism of wheat. And I've been using that a lot in a lot of my work, like the wheat and grass, because I don't know, it's very symbolic to me. And I also think about, what it symbolizes in growth and work and providing all those things. So anyway, for me, but everybody has their own personal symbolism too that they like to use. So I want you to think about that. So before we get started, I'm going to explain this piece to you a little bit. And just kind of give you an idea of what we're going to do and what I'm going to guide you through. So these are just 2 watercolor pieces that I did. These are very spontaneous. This is wet on wet technique. And then there's some wet on dry. There are some splatters on here, the way they kind of blend and run together. Over here, there is the same thing, but then there is some intuitive mark making. And I'll hold this up a little higher. You can kind of see some marks that I have made with the brush over top. And sometimes on wet paper, you get a different technique and a different appearance than you would get if the paper were dry. And so as the paper starts drying, your marks look different and they kind of flow and run together. These create beautiful backgrounds. They also will create paper. So we're going to do all 4 of these. And then as they're drying, we will use them to kind of cut shapes out. So you can kind of see where that would come out here. So we'll use your markers to draw, and then we'll cut around them, any shapes that you want. And this is what I call, and this is something that we're going to create today, is a blessing box. And so you can see that this came from a piece of watercolor paper. And I just glued around the edges and kind of, just stuck something under there so that I can put things in here. And then on the backs of these, I wrote words for the blessings, things that I think have been important for me in the past year, and things that I want to remember from this past year going forward. So when we get all caught up in the busyness, going back to normal and whatever that is, I'm not sure I remember, but in going back to normal, things I have a feeling are going to get really super busy really fast because everything has been on hold for so long. So I just want to remember some of the lessons that I have learned this past year in patience and in faith and in gratitude. And so I wrote those on the backs of here, and they will go in my blessing box. And so I just think that's really very pretty the way that looks. I also have some photos that I may incorporate. This past year, around the first of the year, we took a family get-together, which looks very different from our other family get-togethers. We all kind of quarantined beforehand, and some people were tested. This was just my sisters and their families and my mother and my family, and we rented a beach house, and it was during the winter, but so there weren't that many people there, and it was just kind of remote feeling, but it was beautiful weather. And so I spent a lot of time on the beach, and these are some pictures of that time. And it was a very different holiday. It was a different time of year for us to be at the beach. But it was wonderful. And it's something that I hope that we can do again on a regular basis. So this is something that I would like to take with me from 2020 going forward. So I want to incorporate maybe some of these pictures somewhere. I also have a verse here from Isaiah that kind of sustained me and that I just read several times. And you can see I've kind of decorated it with watercolors. And it just says, when the time is right, I, the Lord, will make it happen. So it's just a lesson in faith and trust and a reminder for me. So that would be something that I could incorporate in here. I could cut it out some more. So that's just what you want to do. This is just a time in the first half of this is to gather your ideas. And then the last half of the class, we will put them all together. So just be thinking about that. I just wanted to kind of go through that and give you some ideas. Maybe that will spark a little creativity for you. I also want you to know that if at any time you have any questions, or you have a comment or something that you would like to say or share, just unmute and chime right in. Don't worry about interrupting me or anything like that. I like for this to be more of a give and take type thing. So feel free to do that. So are there any questions so far? Any questions about what you need? Anybody would like to share anything that they're thinking about with their artwork that we're going to make today? Any ideas that you might like to share that maybe will help to spur somebody else? Anybody? Okay. Don't feel like you have to. I don't want to put the pressure on you. So let's get started painting. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to move all of these out of the way, just kind of move them over a little bit. But I like, when I'm working, I like to leave things like this laying around. It just kind of gives me a little bit of, I don't know, maybe it's encouragement. I don't know. Maybe it's just things that I enjoy creative wise. So I'm going to just kind of leave these things around, and it just kind of helps my thought processes. So the first thing we're going to do, I'm going to start with 2 pieces of paper in the beginning, because I like to, there's the other 2, just making sure I had the other 2, to work at 2 at a time. I never work just one project or one paper or one painting at a time. I have several things going, and that really helps me with my creative process, in that I don't have, you know, just I'm so focused on one, because I can let this dry and then work on something else, and then come back and see it with kind of fresh eyes, or what it looks like once the paint dries, and then work on it some more. So take your little watercolor palette, and you will need to wet these colors with your brush in water, because they're really not workable until they're wet, hence watercolor. And you also have a palette, so you can use this to mix colors if you want to. And so I'm going to add that over here to this area. And I think the one thing we don't have the same are brushes. So I'm just going to take a brush, it's about this size, if you can see, and use that to wet my paint. And I always have a paper towel handy, especially when I'm working with watercolors. So I'm just wetting. Now, all the colors that I'm wetting are the, I'll move this over so you can see it. The colors that I'm wetting are the brighter colors. I will not be using black, and we may be able to use some of the white after we get started here. And I'll wet the brown too, but I'm not going to be using the black. I don't like the way, when I need a really dark color, I take like the brown and the blue and just kind of mix them together and get my dark like that, because it's just a much richer color. The black tends to be very flat, and when it mixes with the other colors, it kind of makes them look dirty, in my opinion. So I don't typically use black in my paintings. And if I do, I use it at the end when it won't be blending with the other colors. So I'm just wetting these. I want these to be nice and wet, because it's just going to make this a little easier. Okay. And always have paper towels handy. See, I'm just going to blot this that I put on here before. And you can see it just kind of looks like a nice soft shadow. So blotting and lifting are 2 of the techniques that I'm going to show you today as well. So the first thing we're going to do is we're going to take the biggest brush that you have, and we're just going to wet an area of the paper. And you don't have to cover the entire paper. The reason for this is I want to show you what happens with the paint when it touches the water. It will go wherever the water is, the paint will. It doesn't go anywhere that there's not water, unless you take your brush and physically put it there. So that's kind of a nice thing to understand. I think that often people get really nervous about watercolors, because we've all had the experience where we made really good mud because our watercolors were really wet and there were all these colors and they're running together and we have zero control. So the only way that you can really control watercolors is through the use of your water. So if you don't want the color to be on a certain part of the paper, then don't put any water on it. And only put the paint where there's water. So I'm using the bright blue. And you can see how they just kind of run together. And I always say there's something very satisfying about watching paint run. If you just really focus on it and just kind of watch the colors blend together. So I'm just adding some other touches of color. So what I want you to do right now is just play. Just play with the water, play with touching certain colors to the water, watching them flow, watching them run together with other colors, and just kind of see what materializes in front of you and go with it. Now, something that you may want to think about are the colors that will make brown. And this is where we get the mud that I was talking about. So if you mix all primary colors together, red, yellow, and blue, you're going to get brown. If you mix blue and orange together while they're wet, you can do this after they're dry and you don't get that much of blending. But if you mix purple and yellow, you're going to get brown, red and green, all those things. So just keep that in mind. And if you want brown, I mean, these are very rich, beautiful browns. So if that's what you want, that's a perfect way to do it. So I'm going to go back, and if you look here, you can see I have some white areas on my paper, and that's because there was no water. I just swiped the brush on here, and there was no water in these areas. So I can go back on the dry areas and just take some wet paint and just kind of fill in these areas with another color. And in some places where there was some water, they'll start to run together. Otherwise, you can get some really neat techniques, some really beautiful colors. And so this is looking a little bit like a landscape to me. But what's really nice is when we work in this fashion, just adding colors to water, I feel more like a facilitator of the paint. It's almost like the paint is doing, the art is making itself. I'm just adding the color in the water and seeing what happens. So I'm going to add up here some more water. And I'm going to add some of this color. And just kind of swipe it across and see what happens. I like that. So I'm going to bring some yellow down into this. Now, when your paper is still kind of wet and not really wet, this is a little fun technique that I like to do. In that I'll get my brush really wet and just kind of roll it around in the paint so that there's a lot of paint on there, and then just splatter. And because the paper's wet, the splatters form these nice patterns and designs. And where they run into the other colors and the other colors run around them. So you can do that with a couple of different colors. Now keep in mind, we're going to use these papers. We're going to pick one for a background. We will pick one to cut out some shapes of leaves or flowers or whatever it is that you want to include in your blessing box. And some of the other ones we can, write verses on, or we'll use some of the paper to actually create the blessing box. So we'll be making 4 of these. So we'll do a little different technique on each one of them just to kind of play and have fun and be creative. But one thing that I want you to be mindful of while we're doing this is any thoughts that occur to you, any blessings, and just try to focus on the blessings that you can take away from this past year and focus on going forward. I mean, they're always there if we look for them. So sometimes they're more obvious than other times. So what I'm going to do now is I'm going to take this paper and just kind of move it over to the side, and I'm going to focus on this other paper that I have right here. So same kind of thing. I am going to this time wet the entire paper. So I'm just using my big brush and I'm wetting the paper, just adding a lot of water. Now, I don't know that I'm finished with this one over here. I'm just letting it dry. And then we will go back into it and work on it some more. So I have a lot of paper, and you'll see that the paper kind of bows a little bit. If you have tape handy and you want to tape it to the table, something before you start adding the water, you can do that. They tend to flatten right back out after you've done that. So what I'm going to do now that I have the paper really good and wet is I'm going to find a color, and I'll start with the kind of the orangey red. And I'm just going to just stripe it right across the edge of the brush and just kind of watch it bleed into the water and into the page. And I'm going to do that again. I'm going to add another color, maybe some yellow down the center of it. And then just watch the colors as they run and bleed together. So I'm just using the flat edge of my big brush to do this. Same thing here. And I always clean off my brush with the paper towel before I want this paint to be kind of dark on here. And I'm just doing it with lines back and forth. I feel like the blues on our palette get darker than some of the other colors, the blues and the purple. So that's why I'm using these. So we're going to do some lifting techniques here and some splatters with just water. So we get the watermarks and prints, and that's why I want this to be a little bit darker so that those show up. And I think I'll do the same thing at the top, but this time I'm going to use the green. I love this green. It's kind of a pear, apple green. It's my favorite shade of green. Now, you can also mix some colors. You can mix them on here, or we have the palette handy. So I could take some blue paint onto the palette right here. Just add a little bit. Clean off the brush really well. And then add some of the green. And so when you do that, you get more of this teal color, which is kind of nice to add to it. Now you can do that on the paper just by kind of alternating the green with the teal, with the blue, I'm sorry, to create the teal. Or you can mix it on the palette. So that's up to you. It's kind of a personal preference. But just have fun. So I can see my colors are just blending together and creating some. Just going to let them all just kind of run into each other now. Add a little bit more color up here. And then, so my paper is really wet. And I have a lot of color happening in there. So what I'm going to do now is take a smaller brush that is just wet. There's no paint on here. And I'm just going to go back in and just kind of add some water and lift. And the best way to do this is to have a paper towel handy. So as you lift up, clean off your brush a little bit. And then you can just paint designs. And you can see where I did that here. You can paint designs with just your clean brush. And then get the extra paint off on your paper towel. So this is a lifting technique. And it's not going to come all the way off, which we really don't want it to. But it is kind of nice to just kind of go back and play with some brush strokes in there. And just lift. Now you can just lift spots of color like this. And if your brush dries out, it's not going to lift, so just kind of wet it again. And I found it's easier to just kind of hold the paper towel in your hand and lift. There. So you're just creating some interesting patterns. Now, like I said, this can be your background. This can be something you use for your blessing box. This can be something that you use to cut out shapes, to collage and glue onto your background, and to include in your blessing box. So just interesting. And then you can go back and move the paint around. Just create some interesting textures. You can drag the paint with a clean brush. If your brush is wet and clean, you can drag the paint in between the areas of different colors. And the paper's still wet, so these are going to blend. And just kind of bleed into each other, but it creates an interesting texture. And like I said, I like the symbolism of the wheat and the grasses. So I'm just going to just do that, make that mark in between there. Just like that. So I like that. I like that lifting technique. This looks very almost like a watery reflection in here, the way that's turned out, which is kind of a nice surprise. That's not really what I had in mind. So I think that that's interesting, is that the media and the paint and the water will surprise you. And if you're paying attention, you notice it. And These are the kinds of things that, you know, like Bob Ross called the happy accidents. But I don't really think they're accidents. I just think it's what happens, and if we're paying attention, we can incorporate them and use them in our art. So yeah, so I have two very different pieces here. I've got this piece is just kind of random colors and paint and splatters. I have this one where I did more of a line on a completely wet paper. And then I did some lifting and dragging of the paint with a clean brush. So I'm just going to take a minute right now before we move on to check in and see how everybody's doing. And if anybody has any questions or frustrations or anything that they would like to share so far, or any questions. So Katie, how's it going for you?
Oh, I'm having a lot of fun just watching the colors run together. It's
there's something very satisfying, very therapeutic about it. It's almost in a way of giving up control and just kind of being curious to see what happens. And so yeah, so good. So do you have two done? I just want to make sure that I'm working at the same pace as everybody else.
I do.
Okay, good.
Oh, that's kind of fun too, where you hold it up and then it just drips and does the thing.
It runs. Yeah, that's something we're going to kind of try too with. And you can do it with this one. Like I have a little bit here where the paint's pooling up at the top here.
Yeah.
So I can just kind of and just let them run together.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
So you get some interesting things that way. But this is kind of interesting here in the way that this paint kind of ran and is kind of bleeding. And then you can turn it different directions too and see what happens. I take a smaller brush, probably one of the smallest ones that you have, and I get it really wet. And then I dip it into the paint and I go back and I just, now it's covered in paint. I think you can see all that blue paint. I hold my finger out like I'm pointing and I just tap it on top of my finger like this. You know, I'll also use an old toothbrush, but since we don't have that handy, this works really well. And if your paint is wet, I mean, your water is wet, they're going to bleed and run, and it'll be like bigger circles and dots. If your paint is kind of dry, then you'll have areas where you can actually see the tiny little splatters. So you get kind of two really neat effects doing that. You can take just like a yellow on top of a wet blue and splatter that. And in some areas, it's going to run and turn into green. So you just want to think about, you know, but I like that. And so you can see, and I'll try to hold this up. In some places it's turning green. And then you can see the areas where it stays and then the areas where it kind of runs together. So it's a lot of fun. So what I'm going to do now is I'm going to move on to my other two papers. And I'm going to work on those, and I'm going to show you some other techniques. So while these are drying, we'll be working on the other two, and then we'll be ready to start creating one piece by putting all of these separate pieces together. I'm just going to move these kind of out of the way and grab my other two pieces of paper here. And this time, I'm just going to paint blocks of color. I'm not wetting the paper first. I'm just wetting my brush and getting wet paint, and I'm just going to add just blocks of color on here like this. And I'll be interested to see which technique you guys like best when we're finished. So I'm going to here add just In some places where the paint's wet, they'll run together if the two colors touch. If you don't want your colors to touch, what you can do is leave dry space in between them. And so this is a technique that I use a lot because I like outlines, kind of white outlines. That's why I do a lot of torn paper. And I like to tear them because I like the white outline that's left behind. So if you leave a little bit of white space in between your areas of color, they will not run together because the paint goes where the water is. So if you want them to run together, don't leave white space like I did right there. And you'll see the way they run together. Good. So I'm just going to fill in with some blocks of color. I'm not worried about what this is supposed to look like. I'm leaving some lines in between. I'm doing brush strokes that are both horizontal and vertical. And just filling in here. And you can see I added, where I'm adding the green here, the blue. I get that, those really pretty colors that bleed together. This is almost like a modern art abstract painting all in itself. Might add a little bit of brown. I don't have any brown in here. And so I might add some and just kind of let it run. These colors, these pretty colors run into it. But this is kind of creating some really pretty taupey brown colors in here with the blues. They're all running together. I like that. So now I have a whole lot of water pooling in color right here. So what I'm going to do is what we did before. I'm going to lift it up and just let it run. And because these are different blocks of color, it's going to run around some. It's going to run over others. If it just kind of stops, just tap it a little. See, some real interesting effects on there. And you can do different directions. It doesn't all have to run the same way. You can turn it sideways. And you'll see where the paint is wet and where the colors run together, you'll get some different blending in different places. So that's kind of what I ended up with from that one. And I really like the way that turned out. So I think I'm going to go back and I'm going to add some yellow paint up here at the top, just a block of yellow up here. And I'll need to get some clean paper towels. But, you know, I really like the effect in here with the yellows and the blues and where they just kind of ran. There's some grays. It's almost like a silvery gray color in there. So I'm going to add some more yellows. And you know, while you're creating this, you'll see things in your painting that remind you of things, and you'll say, oh, you know, that looks like a tree, or that looks like the marshes. And what I've noticed is that everybody will see something different in this kind of painting, because you're taking to the picture your own personal experience, and everybody's experience is different, and that's why we all see different things in our art. So if ever I'm creating something and somebody sees something different in it from what I intended it to be, I'm always flattered. I don't get upset and think, no, it's supposed to be this, because they are relating to the piece with their own personal experience. And so I think that's a really cool thing. So I'm going to go back in here now and add some other areas of color over top, where there are some white spaces. And you don't have to do this. You can kind of keep the white spaces, which I am doing in some places. Because as you can see where I left the white lines, they serve as outlines. Any white space, and that's considered your negative space in your picture, is actually functioning now as outlines around some of these blocks of color. And I think that makes it a little more interesting. So that's a lot of fun. So I have 3 pieces now, and I really like the way this one worked out for now. So I'm going to start working on my final piece of paper. I want this one to be just kind of intuitive for you. I want you to paint this however feels right. I want you to add water and color, dry paper, wet paper, whatever it is that feels right, that is just something that you feel that, you know, like you want to do. So just kind of follow your intuition there. What I'm going to do before I do that is I'm going to go back. My intuition's telling me to add some splatters to this one over here. And I'm going to do that with brown down here at the bottom, across the bottom of it. And again, I wet the brush and I wet the paint and I just splatter. And so that's what I'm going to do here. I'm just going to add, and I already have some paint on here, so I'm just adding some water to it where I splattered. And I'm just going to do what I did over here with the blocks of color, because that felt really good to me. So I just want to do some more of it on this piece of paper. And part of being an intuitive painter is kind of checking in with yourself and thinking about what feels good, what colors you're responding to. As you've added a color to one of your papers, what was it that you liked? What was it that you added and thought, wow, that looks really good. I like that color. And so that's what you really need to think about right now when you go in to add areas of color. I'm leaving a little bit of intentional white space because I do like the way that looks. And I'm just adding some colors. And I do like the silvery kind of gray and the brown and the dark blue. So I'm adding some dark. Everything else has been really kind of bright. So this is almost like a darker purpley gray up there. And that's with just the brown and the darker blue or purple that you have on your palette. So I'm just adding some colors down here. And just think about what you think it needs, what feels good to you. And just add touches of it. Yeah, you can do some of the drippy things that we've done, or you can just kind of sit back and let the paint do its own thing. Add some other colors to it. So now one thing I'm going to do on this piece that I haven't done on the other ones is I'm going to add some water splatters, just water. The splatters that I've added up until now have been with paint, but I think it's kind of interesting. We've done the lifting technique where we took paint away and lifted and had some white space. So I'm going to do just the water on here and see what that does. So I'm just getting my brush really wet. It's a lot of water on here. And then I'm tapping it over top in places. And what's going to happen is that water spots will show up, and it will kind of facilitate the paint running together. And it will also just leave some softer type shapes in there. So I'm going to do the same thing over here on the other piece that I have. Now that it's dry, and you get two different effects. Just adding some water. And you can just kind of fling it on there and see what happens. So there. And so you can kind of see now places where the water I splattered on here. And so the watermarks are showing up. And I think that's a really cool technique. I need to kind of let this one dry a little bit. So I'm going to move it over and go back and look at the pieces that I have here. So we will need to choose one of them to be a background once you've finished painting. And it's never too late to add something else to them. So I'm going to add some more splatters to this one because it's mostly dry now. So I am just going to take I'm just going to take some of this bright orange and add some more splatters on here because I love splatters. And it doesn't really wet the paper too much more when you add splatters like that. And then on this one, I think I'm going to add some water spots. So I'm just flinging a clean brush with water. Now, something else you can do if the paper's dry and you fling the water, just give it a second or two to kind of soak in. And then you can just take a paper towel and lift up. And that's where your spots will really show up. And you can get some cool textures that way too. So I need to choose a background from one of these that I have. And that's going to be the background for the finished piece. So, for example, this one was the background here. We'll choose the other pieces to kind of cut up and create some interesting things. But sometimes I like for my background to be a little more neutral, and then use the pieces that are brighter and more vibrant to cut shapes out of and add to it. But there's something that I want you to do with each piece as you're choosing your background. And that's something I call changing your perspective. So I created this one like this. So if I change my perspective and turn it around, I might see different areas that really speak to me. And I might like different things about it. So this one I created in this direction. So what if I turned it? In turning it that way, it has a lot of motion to it. There seems to be a lot of movement. And I like it like that too. And that's the interesting thing with, especially with abstract pieces, is that they will work in different directions. And your finished piece can be horizontal or it can be vertical. You can decide which way you think it looks best. So for me, I think this piece is really interesting. And I like it like that too. Just some real interesting things. And even if I were to take and add some of my things that I had cut out before over top of that, I really like that. Right there. And then if I changed it all the way around, I like it like this too. So yeah, it's interesting. I really do like this. So let's look at the last one. And you can see the water spots are really showing up in this. And I like that effect a lot. So while these are drying, there's one other thing that I want us to do on one. So I want you to pick one, and we're going to do some kind of intuitive mark making and painting over top of it with your smallest brush. And we're going to paint some patterns, some shapes, just like I did here on this piece. You can see these are just little brush strokes in purple over top of it. And these are longer lines. These are swirly kind of patterns here. And then we'll wet it again and let them kind of run together. But this will create a paper with some really cool textures for you to use in your finished collage piece. So I want to do that on one before we go too much further. I'm not going to use this piece because it's wetter and it still needs to dry. So that leaves me, I'm not going to do this because I'm really happy with some of the things that have been created in here with the water and the paint together. So I'm going to put this one aside. I think this actually might be my background. So I'm going to put this one aside. And you notice how I said I think, because I have no real plan here. This is a very spontaneous type of practice. And that, I think, is where we get more of the benefit of the creative process if we are kind of focused in the moment and just see what happens and ideas as they come to us. So I think what I'm going to do is I'm going to take this one right here and I'm going to add some marks because I already have where the paper was bleeding together, where I dragged the color, where I lifted the color. So I think I'm going to go back into this one and I am going to paint patterns and shapes. And I think I'm going to try to use this little tiny brush that came in your art kit because I like the point on it. So I'm just going to go back in here and I'm going to add some brush strokes just like this. And just fill in some of these areas with some really interesting pattern. And you can kind of let them all run together. You can put them over top of each other. You can space them out. Whatever feels good to you, whatever is pleasing for you to look at. But my paper is mostly dry, so these are really not running around. And so I'm just kind of painting it over top of what was already there. And you can make some of them a lot smaller, like that. And you can make some of them bigger and flatter. And the way you do that is you just press down more with your brush and drag it. Or you can just use the tip of your brush and just do some smaller ones like this. And just add some more visual interest to your paper. And this makes it interesting. I like these splatters that I have on here, so I'm just kind of going around them and not painting over them. And so I'm going to do the same thing up in the orange part. Well, I think I'm going to take some of the green and just do some thin lines. Just kind of across. I'm just kind of dragging. And when I do these thin lines, you'll see that I'm not moving my hand at all. I'm holding the brush very still with my hand. The only thing that's moving is my arm back and forth like this. And that's how you can get a straight line. Because I'm holding the brush very still and straight. My arm is the only thing that's moving. And so I'm just adding some lines here. And keep in mind, we will probably use these papers to cut it up and turn it into something. So we're just adding some visual interest to it. And so I'm going to take another color. I'm going to take the lighter blue, and I'm going to go with a line. I'm going to turn it this way because it'll be easier. Then I can just keep my hand in the same place. And I'm going to go this way. So it's creating kind of a checkerboard. Almost like a plaid, because where the colors run together, they just kind of blend and make other colors. With the green, because the green paint's still kind of wet. But you can make any mark that feels pleasing to you. I like to paint spirals. I paint spirals on everything. And so I'm going to do that here in a minute too. Sure. So just some fun textures here. And I think I am going to paint some spirals. I'm going to use the same blue. And so what I'm doing now is I'm just rolling my brush in the paint. The paint's very wet. My brush is wet. And as I roll it, I just kind of get the paint everywhere. And then I'm just going to go back and just kind of add some spirals. Spiral is one of my very favorite patterns, and it's everywhere in nature. It's in a pine cone, it's in a flower, it's in a lotus, it's in a succulent plant, it's in a snail shell. It's everywhere. And I find a lot of these patterns that I like to paint in nature. Really, I didn't invent any of them. They're all there. If you just pay attention, you'll see them. So I'm just adding some water over top of them. And just adding my spirals. I like that. And I like the blue over top of the orange. Now what I like to do after I do these is take a bigger brush that's wet and just add some water. And then they all just kind of run. It softens and then they just run together. It's just a clean brush of wet paint, of water. And then they just kind of all run together. You can change your perspective and turn it around a little bit. Maybe find a place to add another cool little pattern. So I think I might add some circles, just some circles in here. And I'm going to use the orange kind of over top of the green. And I'm just adding some circles, and you can add different sizes. Make some big and some small. While you're painting these and you're being very intuitive with your marks, I want you to think about the next step in this painting, in putting this together, and that is, what are the blessings that you want to focus on for the finished piece? The blessings that you can take away from this year. And just think about that. You know, they'll be different for everybody, because there's going to come a time where we want to write those or include those in some way in your artwork. So you can go back with these circles and you can just kind of fill in some of them. That's kind of fun too. And you can just wet your brush and just go around the edges of the paint. It's a little wet, and it just makes a really cool pattern. You don't have to do all of them. But yeah, it's kind of cool. So I'm gonna let that dry for a minute, and then I'm gonna take just a big wet brush and go over it and soften it so that it all kind of bleeds together. So how's everybody doing? Has anybody come up with any patterns that feel really good to them and that they definitely want to include in their finished piece? Katie, I'm going to pick on you.
Oh, I don't know. I did a bunch of different spirals and circles and half circles and
Oh, good.
teardrop shapes and whatever else felt right.
Things that feel good, and you can go back and paint in some of those shapes too. And then the colors will kind of run together a little, and you know. So I'm going to take my brush now that's just wet and just kind of paint over so that some of them kind of fade out.
Yeah.
And they run together, and then some of them are, you can kind of see, it creates an interesting pattern like that. So anybody else have anything? So as you're finishing that up, I want you to think about which piece you want to use for your background. So I think I'm torn. I really like this painting. But I think this one might make a better background.
The piece that's the background, will that be visible or is that going to be covered? I mean, should we pick one that we really like or one that we really don't like?
The background will be visible. The background will definitely be visible. It'll probably be more visible because the other ones we're going to cut up. So I think for that reason, thank you for helping me decide, because I decided that I'm going to use this one because I like it best. So that's going to be my background. And so then you want to find which way you feel like it works the best for you. And I think that this is the way that I planned it, and this is what I'm going to do there. So now we need to think about, once you choose your background, what are some of the other things that you want to include in this picture? So I have my verse that I may or may not include. I could even use this for the blessing box. I kind of like that idea. And then maybe just add another color on there. So maybe that's what I'll do. So let's see. I'm going to cut this right here. And I think I might put my blessing box across the bottom here. So your blessing box is a piece of paper that you've cut out from something else that you had. So if you can find an area on here that you really like, and then think too, do you have pictures that you want to incorporate? Photocopies, words, things that you cut out of magazines. I have these because it reminds me of our beach trip that I spoke about earlier. So I think that I might actually use some of this. So I'm going to cut this one, this long skinny one. And this actually was a happy accident. I cut it off with the copier. It's actually a big picture. And then I thought, wait, I like that shape. I'm going to keep it. So you can just maybe find a place for these pictures if you have any that you want to use. If you don't have any, that's fine. We have plenty of things to work with here. So if I use this for my blessing box with the verse, you can also, because I'm just going to give you lots of options, and then you decide what works best for you. You have all of these papers. You could cut out your blessing box from a scrap of the paper that you were given in your kit. You could use your markers to draw some of the patterns on your paper that match maybe some of the patterns that you did on your painting. So I will take maybe this pink. And for example, I have this circular pattern here. So I could do the same kind of thing with my markers on my paper and then use this somewhere as well, different sizes. Fill in some of them. And just kind of make it consistent in that then there's something else that I could use in there. You can use a different shape or color combination for your blessing box, something that's going to stand out. So because I want to put my blessing box down here at the bottom, I may put this behind it. Could do something like that. Kind of like the way that looks. So if you're creating a collage, some important things to remember are overlapping. When you overlap items in a collage, they tend to work together as one piece. Whereas if you were to space it out separately in different areas, that doesn't always happen. Sometimes it just looks like a lot of separate pieces put together. So what I'm going to do, and I like this, but I don't know that I want it to be the blessing box. I don't even know that I want it to be in the collage. So what we do now, I call this the wish list. We pull it all together. We have all of our ideas, and then we will go back and edit. Because typically when people are making something like this, they have an effect that I call the kitchen sink. It's like everything and the kitchen sink. And you don't need everything and the kitchen sink. You need to go back and kind of, once you get all of your pieces together, go back and kind of finalize what you actually want to use. So the other thing that I want to do is I want you to think about, and if I'm getting ahead of you, I'm sorry, tell me just to slow down. I want you to think about how you want to represent your blessings in this picture. The blessing box, I like that idea, and I like cutting out shapes from these other papers that we made and then kind of including them in the blessing box. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to maybe make this my blessing box, put this picture behind it, and then let these pieces kind of hang out in front of the picture like this. But I'm going to cut out some of these shapes just to kind of show you how to do it. And so I think that I will do, and you can do them any way that you want. You can make this look more like a rose bud. You can make this look like leaves, like I did here, almost like the eucalyptus type plant leaves. Or you can make them look just single leaves that are just kind of fitted down in there. Or you can just take pieces of paper like this, write your blessings on here, and put them inside of your blessing box like this. And just let them be. So that's up to you. That's just kind of a personal choice. I think what I'm going to do is I'm going to cut out some more of these because I might use these in my picture somewhere, kind of collaged over top. So I think I might do a different shape inside of my blessing box. So once you have your blessing box, we need to glue that down so that it has time to set up. So I'm going to take the glue that came in the kit. It's just Mod Podge. And you have a brush with black bristles, and that is the glue brush. And I'm going to go ahead and glue this down onto my background so that it has time to set up. So I'm going to just glue around 3 edges because we want the top of it to stay open. So I'm just going to glue around. And don't be afraid to use a lot of glue. And I am going to take a scrap piece of paper and put inside of it so that it doesn't stick all the way down to be easier to get things in and out. And I'm just going to glue that down. Just press it down on there because I really want that to set up. And now, if it's not sticking, lay something heavy over top of it or just sit something on top of it. I think this is going to stay. But just in case, I'll just take this and put on top of it for now, just for a few minutes while I cut out some shapes. So what you want to do is look at the papers that you have and think about what would make a good pattern or shape for whatever it is that you want to put inside of your blessing box. I mean, I have these things and I liked that. I think I'll try something a little different this time. I think I might try maybe some kind of a flower shape coming out of that. Or I like the idea of the grasses, like the wheat, because I did that before and I really liked it. So I'm going to take my markers, my permanent markers that I have here, and you have some just like that. And I am going to draw on here, on my other piece, what it is that I want to cut out. So I want to have maybe some of this wheat shape and grasses, and I have this one kind of bent, and I'm going to do some others that are not bent. And I'm exaggerating the leaves. So I'm going to cut that one out and see how it looks. Now, when I cut these out, I leave space around the edges because I want my lines to show up. So I cut like this so that I have a little bit of space around the outside edges. But you can think about something that is maybe a symbol to you. It could be a symbol of Passover for you. It could be a symbol of maybe your Passovers in the past. And you can write your blessings on that. And so that way you can kind of incorporate the past Passovers, good memories, into this piece, even though it, you know, it might look a little different this year. So I'm cutting around here. So that's kind of interesting. And so it would go in like this. I'm going to do another one. And I think I'm going to use a different color for this one. And I'm going to make this one look like this. Sometimes you have to play around with it a little bit so you get a shape that you really like. So I'm going to cut this one out now. Use this too. And you can have one for each blessing that you want to incorporate, or you can have just one and write all of the blessings on the back of it. So that's just up to you, however you want to represent these. And this might also be something that you don't finish today, something that you come back to and add to as you have more time to kind of think about it and just kind of ponder a little bit about what it is that you want to include. So I'm going to move this. And so I have this shape here. And so this, now these will fit down in there. And I am going to add my picture on the background here behind my blessing box. Or actually, I think I might put it over here and then have these kind of in front of it, like that. So I want to check in with everybody while we're doing this, get an idea of the time. And just maybe somebody has some ideas that they'd like to share with us that, or maybe you're struggling a little bit with ideas and what to do next. So just want to kind of check in and see how everybody's doing. Katie, how are you doing?
I'm good. I'm cutting little leaves out to sort of represent new growth. And really wasn't sure which one I wanted to do for my background, and I kept going back and forth and back and forth. So, but I am pleased with the one I chose.
Oh, really? Good.
Yeah.
Yeah, same here. I have several that I liked. And I like putting this kind of along the edge of the picture so you don't really see the edge of the picture. And it's okay to kind of run off the page a little bit. That's called what I call breaking the frame. And it's really very interesting because when you go, if this was something that you wanted to hang in your house and mat, you could mat it on top of the mat board. And then these edges would just kind of hang out around the picture, and that's kind of actually very cool. I think what I'm going to do is I'm going to make a collaged flower, I think, to go inside my blessing box. I am gluing some of these shapes that I had cut out before on here. And I'm just going to have this kind of go up and off the page like that. So I'm just going to set that. And then I am going to create a, I'm going to use this little swirl for the center, and I'm going to create a flower to go inside. And I'm going to save these for something else because I just got this idea of the flower. And I'm going to write my blessings on the petals of the flower. So this is one of the fun parts where hopefully the creativity all starts to just come together and all the ideas. But if you feel like you have too many ideas, like there's too much happening and you're getting kind of overwhelmed, it's time to edit. You need to kind of take a step back and so I may even put my verse behind where the flower is going to go. I don't know. I don't know that I'm going to include that. I do kind of like it up there. So I'm just going to leave it there while I'm working on my flower and think about that a little bit. But as far as flower petals, I am going to just find some areas where I like the colors and the pattern in my other papers and have all different ones, different colors, different shapes. And so I'm just cutting out petals. I'm not paying too much attention to how they look. I want them to all be different. I want some of them to be kind of these darker blues because I think that'll stand out really nicely behind the colors that are already there on the paper. Like that. And then this paper has got some really bright colors. So, and I like some of these techniques. with the water spots. So I'm going to include some of these with the petals. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to write my blessings on the back of the petals. So the person looking at the picture won't see them, because it's okay to do things in our artwork that is just for us and that we don't necessarily want to share. That's okay. And for the longest time, I always tell people, you know, I thought that my artwork was something that I did for other people to enjoy the finished product, and their response to it was, you know, really important to me. And then it dawned on me that I was missing the whole point. The artwork was for me, and then other people would see it and enjoy it in however worked for them, whatever way worked for them. So art, the process, the creating, that's what we do for ourselves. Got so many petal possibilities here. And let's see. So I'm going to go ahead and start gluing some of these down on here. So I'm just adding glue to the petals. But what's interesting is when you cut out these little pieces of paper, you just see how fun these patterns are. Even the white spaces and the splatters and things that show up. It's very interesting. Put this one here. And, you know, it's okay to overlap some of them too. There we go. Now I do want this to show up. And so sometimes it's nice to kind of outline a little bit. If you feel like there are areas that aren't showing up, you can use your markers for that. You can use a pen for that. Anything that you think, I mean, if you don't want the real thick lines of the markers, you can use something else. So since I have blue lines on here, I'm going to use a blue pen. And I'm going to actually outline inside of some of my petals here, because I think this will help to set them apart from the background, because there's a lot happening in that background right there. And what's really fun about doing this spontaneous practice is I'm always surprised by whatever turns up. So it's kind of interesting to go into this without any real expectations and just see what happens. Outline this, and I may add some more petals to this. But now you can see that it shows up a little better than it did before. And remember, I said that about overlapping. So we do want to overlap some of the elements so that it all works together. But I think that I need maybe another petal on here. So, and if this is going to go up here, I want it to stand out. So maybe green. I think a green petal. And I just so happen that I have some of that right here. Come down there. Actually, I'll stick it all on its own. Okay. There we go. Now I want everybody to share these. So I'm going to hurry up and get this on here. And then hopefully we can take a few minutes here to just kind of share. And if you're not quite finished, just share your ideas. Going to add a stem onto my flower here so that I can put it down in the blessing box. Like that. And then, like I said, I'm going to write my blessings on the back of this. And then it will fit inside of the blessing box like this. And I still have my verse here that I don't know that I'm going to use. Like I said, we have to go back and edit. Sometimes it's too much information. And I feel like I really like that background. This is why I chose this one. So I think that I should probably just leave that. So I think that the verse didn't make the edit. This is going to go right there. Now you can cut out letters, you can use some hand lettering, any of those things on here. So I think that you kind of get the gist here of what mine is going to look like. And I'm going to kind of let the petals interact. And this kind of creates like a heart shape right here with the leaves. And so, you know, I'll add some other areas and maybe some more interesting things. But this blessing thing kind of looks a little bit like a flower pot now. And so I could maybe add like something else to that to kind of give it that feel. So yeah, I'll hold this up. So this is what I have so far. Katie, did you want to say anything to everybody before?
I just wanted to say thank you to you, Jennifer, and thank you for everybody for coming and for sharing. Also to thank the Carolina Foundation for Jewish Seniors, who supports the grant that funds this project with the Creative Aging Network and the High Notes project that I run. So thank you, thank you, thank you. And if I don't see you all, I wish you a very, very happy Passover.
Well, thank you, Katie. And I enjoyed it. As always, I enjoy creating with all of you. And so hopefully we can do it again.